So as the title of this video suggests, we're going to break down the last couple days as they pertain to the San Francisco Giants. We're going to talk about the moves that they made at the trade deadline, the players that they traded, the players that they acquired, and ultimately what it means for this team going forward this year, as well as in the future, given that they did receive a lot of prospects in return. But before getting into that, I did want to outline what these last couple of days have been like for me personally, just because it's deadline season. It's the busiest time of the year, and the last couple of days have definitely been on the more adventurous side. It's involved a lot of breaking the routines that I like to employ on a day-to-day basis that I use to keep me sane over the course of baseball season. So if you have no inclination to hear how these last couple of days have been for me personally, I'll put up a timestamp somewhere in here. But this all kind of begins on Tuesday, and as many of you know, I was in Atlanta for the Braves series. You can kind of tell by my cadence as of right now how tired I am, or how fatigued I am, rather. But I was in Atlanta for that 3-game series. The Giants obviously took 2 out of 3. They had the off day, so there was no game to cover. I covered the entirety of the Mets series. I covered the first 2 games of the Pirates series, and I was initially scheduled to have the Wednesday game off, and the only reason I was scheduled to have that game off, even though it was in the midst of deadline season, was because, covering the Atlanta series, covering the first 5 games of the homestand, we have the trade deadline, have to travel to New York. It was an opportunity to get me a blow. And that wasn't my decision. That was my editor's decision, because it does not want to run me into the ground. But on Tuesday, when the Giants lost, when they dropped to 500 for the first time not all season, but since the second game of the season, and that in conjunction with Justin Verlander not speaking to reporters, I started to get a very odd vibe, just given where this team was headed, given that for so long it looked like they were going to be buyers, but now, again, they were 500 for the first time all season. And I slacked my editor, rather. It was like 11 o'clock at night, which I typically don't like to do, but I did want to tell him, like, hey, I think it would be my best interest, even if I'm not going to write, just to be at the ballpark in case something does happen. He agreed, and we kind of had it be a bit of a rover day, if that makes sense. I would go to the ballpark, and some of you know I don't actually live in San Francisco. I live in one of the suburbs outside of San Francisco in the East Bay, but it was going to kind of be in a rover role. We'll see what happens on Wednesday, if anything happens at all. If nothing happens, then I just go home and prepare for the deadline and to travel to New York. But then, of course, Tyler Rogers gets traded to the New York Mets in exchange for 3 players. We discussed that in the video a couple days ago. And leaving the ballpark that day, I was like, yeah, that was probably the good play for me to be there. But also now I've tacked on another day of work in what already is a pretty arduous stretch. So then that leads into deadline day, and didn't have the opportunity to record on deadline day because the deadline was at 3. We spoke with President of Baseball Operations and Buster Posey and General Manager Zach Manassian at around 4 o'clock local time. There was some errands that I had to run once I filed my story. My flight out of Oakland, I want to say, was at 10 o'clock. And I want to admit right here, this is where I messed up as far as the planning of getting to New York. I was always going to take the red eye. I obviously didn't want to be in the air if something happened of significance. But I booked a flight with 2 connections, one in Vegas, one in Chicago, and that was, I don't know what past justice was thinking. It was just a very bad move. But hop on the flight to Vegas around, I think the originally scheduled time to leave was like 9, which would have made the departure time like 8:30, but then it got pushed back to like 10, and then the flight out of Vegas to Chicago got delayed, so I didn't leave Vegas until like 1 a.m., and because of that, I had to miss my initial connection from Chicago to LaGuardia, so they pushed my flight back, the flight out of Chicago, that is, from like 6:30 to 9, so I land in New York around 11:30, 12, go to my hotel, and all I really have time to do, because I'm taking the subway, and even if I was driving, it wouldn't have been easy, but pretty much get to the hotel, put my stuff down, shower, head to the ballpark, and I meet up with the B crew. It's the crew this weekend being Maria Guardado, Susan Slusser, Andrew Bagley. They're all kind of looking at me like, are you okay from like an energy perspective? And For the majority of Clubhouse pregame, I was fine. And then I think it was sometime during the game, it just all hit me like that, and I crashed. So it was definitely not the easiest gamer in the world to write. It definitely wasn't the easiest pregame story in the world to write. And this is also, as you might imagine, in conjunction with just, it's been a lot of days, a lot of Giants baseball being watched over the course of the last couple of weeks. And so this morning, I woke up at about 11:30. I think I slept for 10 hours. I have a sleep app, and it gave me like 100% sleep quality, which means I was knocked out. And now I'm here at the ballpark where the Giants yesterday, they brought themselves back up to 500 with a 4-3 win in 10 innings. And then today they get blown out 12-6. They're back below 500. They're currently 55-56 on the season. And that was a lot of rambling without getting into the actual dynamics of the trade deadline. So if you listen to that, thank you very much. If not, it's 4 minutes of filler or whatever it amounts to being. So getting into the deadline, we obviously discussed the Tyler Rogers trade a couple of days ago, but if you would like a refresher, the Giants acquire 3 players in exchange for Rogers, that being right-handers Jose Butto as well as Blade Tidwell and outfielder Drew Gilbert. At the time of the trade, I think Tidwell was the Mets' number 10 prospect and Gilbert was their number 12. Butto was instantly joined the major league team. Tidwell joined AAA Sacramento as well as Drew Gilbert. The Camilo Duvall trade, which is something that we thought would be a possibility, especially given the fact that he's set to hit arbitration for the second time this offseason. He goes to the New York Yankees in exchange for 4 players, that being Jesus Rodriguez, right-hander Tristan Vierling, infielder Parks Harbor, and left-hander Carlos De La Rosa. And then Mike Yastrzemski goes to the Kansas City Royals in exchange for right-hander Junior Marte. That is not the same Junior Marte from the Eric Miller trade. And then it's also worth noting that in his very first game as a Kansas City Royal, he homers. And not only does he homer, but he does so against former Giants teammate Kevin Gausman. So a very odd kind of connecting the dots moment there for Mike Yastrzemski. And speaking generally on the trade deadline, and this is something that we discussed a little bit with the Tyler Rogers trade, as far back as 2, maybe even 3 weeks ago, going into the second half, for sure, this is not a position that the Giants envisioned that they were going to be in, especially when they made the acquisition of Rafael Devers on Father's Day. This team, given how well they started the season, given the acquisition of Devers, and even going further back to the signing of Willy Adames and even the extension of Matt Chapman, this was a team that was built to win now. This was a team that had the expectations of winning now. And, not too long ago, this was a team that was in prime position to compete for a wild card spot right behind the San Diego Padres. And of course, we've talked about how the last couple of weeks have unfolded. They've lost up to this point, I think it's 14 of their last 17 games. They're 11-13 or 12-14. I'm forgetting what the exact number is, but they've only won 3 games. They're 3-11 to start the second half. That's what it is. They've now fallen, as of I'm recording right now, there's 6.5 games of the San Diego Padres. And as you may know, the San Diego Padres just completely bolstered their roster at the trade deadline. A.J. Preller with another just banger of a trade deadline where he goes out and acquires Mason Miller, J.P. Sears, Ryan O'Hearn, among others, and really bolsters that team. And given the fact that the Padres, before the deadline, or at the deadline rather, were already 5 games ahead of the Giants for that final wild card spot, and now they've gone ahead and bolstered, the odds that the Giants are able to snatch that wild card spot are dwindling incredibly fast. To get into some of the players that the Giants acquired, we talked a little bit about Butto and Tidwell again in the previous video, so I don't want to get into that too much. Just go rewatch that video or go pick out the parts of that video if you'd like a deeper explanation as to who those players are. As far as the Duvall package, I think there's been kind of an overwhelming sense that it wasn't, a huge prospect package that the Giants got in return, especially given that they got a pretty solid return for Rogers, who again is an unrestricted free agent, whereas Duvall has the rest of this season as well as 2 seasons of team control remaining before hitting free agency after the 2027 season. But the most intriguing prospect to me of that pool is 23-year-old, I'm not going to put complete air quotes around catcher, but catcher / infielder / also left fielder Jesus Rodriguez. He has a career slash line, let me find it here, of 308, 395, 459 in the minor leagues. And the thing about Rodriguez that's incredibly fascinating is I'm going to let that pass by, allow myself to catch my breath too. One of the intricacies of covering games at Citi Field. But one of the intriguing things about Rodriguez is kind of because of the nuances of the New York Yankees farm system. They've had a lot of catching prospects. So Rodriguez hasn't been a full-time catcher pretty much during the entirety of his time in the Yankees farm system. One of the catchers that was blocking him at some point, I believe, was Agustin Ramirez, who's now with the Miami Marlins. And I saw some tweet earlier today that the Yankees have traded away 5 catching prospects, Rodriguez being one of them. But the career slash line of 308, 395, 459 in the minors only has the 30 homers, so not exactly a huge power guy. And again, he's played pretty much all around the diamond over the course of his minor league career. He spent time, in addition to catcher, where he spent the most time, at first base, second base, third base, and left field. And it was a pretty funny, there was a very specific comparison that came to mind for me, and talking with a couple team officials, it was a very interesting comp for them as well. Andy Rodriguez of the Pittsburgh Pirates, and I know to many of you that name might not register at all, given this is of course the Giants, not the Pirates. But of course, I covered the Pirates for 2 years, and Andy Rodriguez was one of their top catching prospects. But because of Henry Davis being the top catching prospect that they had as well, Rodriguez ended up playing a lot of time at other positions to ensure that his bat got in the lineup. And similar to Jesus Rodriguez, he was a contact-first guy, had really good in-zone contact rates. And so the comparison, it was a very specific one. But, for me personally, again, having covered Andy and having seen him make his major league debut, seen him, from Altoona to the majors, it was the first guy that kind of came to mind. But, the combination of the ability to play all around the infield, the fact that he is a catcher, with a pretty strong arm, the bat-to-ball skills, the contact skills, the lifetime 308 batting average in the minors, that was especially fascinating to me. And I'm pretty curious as to how or where he goes from here from a developmental standpoint. Do the Giants allow him to spend the majority of his time with AAA Sacramento as a catcher? Do they have him move around? Do they kind of develop him as a super utility guy? I'm just very fascinated to see where that goes from there. And when we were talking to Buster Posey a couple days ago at the trade deadline, Rodriguez was one guy who, of the prospects that they received, and that includes the prospects that they received in the Rodgers trade as well. Rodriguez was the one guy that he highlighted in particular. To quote Posey from a couple days ago, he said, "All he's done is hit. He's been a player. Listening to our pro scouting department talk about him, that's kind of come onto the scene a little bit later. He's never been a really famous guy. He's a 308 hitter in the minors. You watch his swing, he sprays the ball over the field. We're happy, excited about him." And regarding the famous guy quote, I believe, if I remember, I have it right here in front of me. Rodriguez at the time of the trade was the Yankees' number 25 prospect. It is an interesting contrast because Fangraphs actually had him going into the season as, I believe, either their number 10 or their number 12 prospect. So a little bit of a difference between the two publications. But again, I'm just incredibly curious to see where they go with Rodriguez from a developmental standpoint. And I am also curious to see if he's able to make his major league debut at this point as well, considering the direction this team is headed, that even though they still have the core of this group intact, there might come a point where it's just more about trying to get as many young guys up to the major league level as possible and seeing what they have going into free agency. And that kind of leads into the second part of this equation in regards to the deadline. The Giants obviously did get rid of 3 players who were not exactly, I don't want to say foundational elements of this team, but they were incredibly valuable supporting elements of this team. Mike Yastrzemski has been a perpetual 2B WAR player for the entirety of his career. This is a very nerdy thing to point out, but if you look at his baseball reference page, it's just every year with the Giants, at least 2B WAR. It's very clean. It's just very aesthetically pleasing, and I know that's not what people are going to look back at his career for, but obviously the 5 career walk-off homers, the walk-off that he had against Josh Hader a couple of years ago, and the last play that he makes in a Giants uniform is him diving into the stands to make a play. Obviously, you wouldn't make that play without the netting, but if that was, I remember tweeting, it was fair to wonder if that was his final act. It was a hell of a final act to go out on, and it ended up being that. Duvall, obviously being a one-time All-Star, reemerged into the closer role this year. Tyler Rogers, just the most dependable reliever in all of baseball since he made his debut. From an availability perspective, I can't remember his career ERA, but it's below 3. So the Giants, as of right now, are objectively a worse team now compared to where they were prior to the trade deadline. The guys that they brought up following the trade, Grant McCray, Kai-Wei Tang, and I'm forgetting the third, and Jose Buto, of course. I can't believe I forgot about that. As I said, it has been a long couple of days. But the 3 players that they brought in and the 3 players they shipped out, again, they're objectively a worse team. And no disrespect to Buto or Tang or McCray, but they don't have the statistical resume that Rogers and Yastrzemski and Duvall had. But despite the fact that the Giants traded 3 very valuable players from their team, 2 of which, again, are upcoming free agents, the message, the overall sentiment that the Giants have continued to carry is that, despite getting rid of a couple guys, the foundation of this team is still here. And when you look at the foundation, that's Willy Adames, Matt Chapman, Rafael Devers, Jungwoo Lee, Logan Webb, Robbie Ray. These are guys who are still here, and theoretically, not even theoretically, mathematically, it still is possible for the Giants to make some type of run. They have, I want to say, 51 games remaining, 6.5 as of right now, out of contention for the final NL wildcard spot. And I mentioned this with Mike Yastrzemski. I'm going to let another plane go overhead. But I mentioned this when Rogers got traded and we talked to Mike Yastrzemski. He said that crazier things have happened. And given how well this Giants team played in the month of April, it wouldn't be outside of the realm of possibility for them to still make some type of run. We saw this with the Detroit Tigers last year, where they sold at the deadline and they still ended up making the playoffs. They ended up being the hottest team in baseball, and they really roared into the playoffs. So it's not impossible. But that being said, if we're looking at this, objectively, it is a lot more difficult to get into the playoffs without Duvall, without Rogers, and without Yastrzemski. So as far as where this team stands, because obviously Rogers was a setup man, Duvall was the closer, Yastrzemski was the starting right fielder. With the closer role, Randy Rodriguez has been elevated from that 7th inning role to the closer role, and he recorded his first save. In last night's game, it was a pretty heart-palpitating win. They load the bases for the heart of their order, and I can't remember who we ended up getting for the final out. But it was a very, we can say, Duvall-esque save. And, saves in the bottom of the 10th inning or in extra innings generally a lot more difficult because you've already got the tying run or the automatic runner at second base. As far as the setup role, I would imagine we see some Buto there, some Ryan Walker. Eric Miller is working his way back from his elbow injury as well, so I would imagine those are the guys that we're kind of going to see in the high leverage role. And then as far as right field, Luis Matos got the start yesterday. Grant McCray got the start today, and he made the most of the start, going 2 for 4, single, a triple, and an RBI. He did have a less than ideal at bat in his first. He comes up to the plate with the bases loaded. I think Kodai Senga's kind of on the ropes a little bit. His control's a little erratic. And then hits no outs either, and he hits into a double play. And he's able to drive in a run, doesn't get credit for the RBI. Has a sprint speed of 31.3 feet per second, where 30 feet per second is considered elite. So that at-bat wasn't the greatest in the world, but you kind of saw some of the ability that he has. Theoretically, this should provide McCray for an opportunity to win a spot, to earn some playing time. He's going to have, again, we got about 51 games left in the regular season. We saw what he could do last year as far as that combination of power and speed. It is a very enticing combination. He's very toolsy. I think that's the word. That's the most appropriate word to use. And Matos has gotten not extended time starting, but he has seen time in right field as well. And over the course of his major league career, just hasn't really put it all together, aside really from that week he had last year where he kind of just went berserk against the Los Angeles Dodgers and whoever else they played that week. But it will be worth seeing exactly how that all shakes out and whether one of them can really establish themselves as the definitive starting right fielder. Some other assorted notes on the trade deadline. The Giants did receive some intrigue on two-time All-Star Robbie Ray. Ray is, of course, owed $25 million next year before becoming a free agent after the 2026 season. Posey said they would have had to have been blown out of the water in order to trade him. They obviously did not receive a deal that met that standard, so they elected to retain him. Justin Verlander is someone that's still in a Giants uniform as well. Posey mentioned that before Verlander even signed with the team, he and Verlander talked about the possibility of what Verlander might want to do at the deadline, but prior to the deadline itself, there weren't really any conversations that Posey and Verlander had as far as Verlander being traded. Wilmer Flores and Dominic Smith remain Giants as well. They're both set to become free agents this offseason. So that's kind of where this Giants team stands as of right now. The other big thing to get into as far as what we might see going forward is this could provide some guys that are currently at AAA Sacramento with an opportunity, maybe Marco Luciano in particular down the stretch, depending on how things go. But as far as top prospect Bryce Eldridge, Buster Posey did throw a little bit of cold water on that possibility, saying that he wants to, kind of similar, going back to the winter meetings, to kind of temper expectations, given that Eldridge did miss a couple weeks due to, I think it was the right hamstring injury. So obviously never say never, and maybe if Eldridge just puts together a crazy month, or month and a half rather, with AAA Sacramento, he could potentially earn his cup of coffee before becoming the starting first baseman or designated hitter next year. But as of right now, again, and that's as of right now, it does not seem that there's a strong possibility that Eldridge is going to make his major league debut this season.